Good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I so hope that you enjoyed the film, and thank you for joining us on our Join the Conversation series with Georgia Equality as we celebrate Pride this month. My name is Craig Hardesty. I'm the board chair of Out on Film, and I am delighted to bring you producer of Queering the Script, Steph Ouaknine, and our hostess, Chanel Haley, and they're going to have a conversation. If you want to ask questions at any point during the Q&A, please use the chat box, and we'll kind of be interspersing some questions as we go along. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to the two of you, and thank you so much for being here.
Right, thank you. So let's dive right on in. So Steph, why don't you tell us kind of what the inspiration was about the film? Like, did you already know? Are you part of the fandom? Did you have a favorite show? I mean, Did you stumble upon this? Did you?
Oh, so it's a funny story because the way this film actually started is as a Canadian broadcaster. I'm the producer of Carmilla, one of the web series that we show in the film. Thank you everyone for watching it, by the way, the doc. And the broadcaster wanted to do a kind of half-hour piece on the Carmilla fandom. And then I kind of thought, why don't we make it about something a lot larger than just our show? You know, it really feels like there's an opportunity here. So then we pitched them, instead of doing, you know, a TV half-hour about just this, why don't we make it about fandom? And then thankfully they went for it. And before we knew it, we were making a feature doc. So that's been a lot of fun. I'm definitely from fandom. It's kind of why I got into TV, because I wanted to make more gay shit. Pardon, I probably shouldn't swear. And what's interesting is that my director, Gabrielle, is a queer woman who wasn't in fandom. So she was kind of coming at it with fresh eyes, just learning all of this. And we kind of had a sit down at the beginning where I just gave her the rundown of fandoms from Xena all the way to Pose, and how that works online and where the intersections play. And our editor, Shelley, is a queer woman who's also in fandom, but in different fandoms than mine. So we really came at it from three different, you know, these three central positions were three different queer women with a different relationship and experience to fandom. And I think that really helped to kind of all come from not the same place. But yeah, I've been in it since I was 11 or 12. And it still is a big part of my life.
Okay, well, that changed a lot of my questions. So, well then, so I guess that means that you then have also been at the Lexicon and you're pretty active there. So is there kind of like a favorite there, without being biased around your show? But like, is there pretty much known of who people are there to see? Which show is number one?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an idea. It depends on the year, you know, and which kind of actors they get there to celebrate. Winona Earp's definitely been, and the DC shows have had a really strong following. A lot of the same people come to the cons, and I think what we wanted to show as well in the doc, that it becomes first and foremost about community. So you'll see a lot of the same people come back year after year to the cons, because it's as much about seeing each other than it is about seeing the actors and kind of going through the motions. But was that your question, or do I have a favorite fandom, like regardless of cons?
Well, you can tell me what your favorite is too. I I imagine probably Carmilla, but I was just trying to figure out if people were coming there. It was kind of like just what you said. They were coming there mainly for like one big show, but as you say, it's different parts of the different years depending on what's hot. But because now knowing, and you admitted earlier that you have been kind of in the fandom for many years when you were really young, so that means I guess you did fan fiction, and is that kind of what took you into writing and kind of honed your skills before becoming a professional?
Yeah, I actually, I was on the fan art side. I loved talking to, and I was a beta reader for a lot of fanfic writers. So they would send me their fanfics and I would edit them and talk about characters on the show, which is essentially what I do now in like television development, is working with writers and, you know, trying to set up our new series. So it kind of tracked naturally. And I just really loved just a discussion and community. And we kind of found, I think I discovered a lot about my own queerness through fandom, like a lot of the people in this documentary. So I will say on the record, it was like Lila and Fred from Angel. I think I'd read some fic about those two women, and I was like, oh, something gay is going on here, you know? And it's almost like that fanish experience led me to look at my life in a different way, and kind of definitely helped me come into my own, seeing like, look at all these, you know, there's this cool queer community online and they're fine and they're just doing it. So maybe it'll be okay in real life.
So that makes me just automatically go to that you are definitely a role model, because I would imagine young people who are really attached and really are into fan fiction and have dreams, you are living the dream. You're exactly a prime example of why this makes sense, and you should still do your fan fiction no matter what, who supports you, who doesn't, because this is what could end up happening.
And if anything, it can only help you, because, you know, if you look at the landscape today, there's over 500 scripted shows on the air. Most of us don't know all 500. So what sticks out are really the shows that develop their own audience, which goes hand in hand with fandom. Like discoverability means a lot. Fandom is worth a lot to people on the kind of gatekeeper side. And a lot of shows like Winona, like One Day at a Time, being saved by Pop TV, a lot of their shows have managed to continue in great part thanks to their fandom. And Carmilla is part of that as well. So if that's what I tell most people who are in fandom, who want to work professionally as well, I'm like, it's a great time to use that passion and kind of not be ashamed of it, and really, yeah, be proud of it. And that's also why we wanted to also showcase writers who had come from fandom in the doc. So Britta London from Riverdale also started as someone from fandom. So she kind of, that's why she's also very kind of in tune with the workings, because she came from that side as well.
Okay. Hey, Jim or Craig, do we have any questions from the chat box yet?
We don't have anything yet, so go ahead.
Are there any questions yet? What did he say?
Not quite yet.
I don't know if we can't see them on our side now.
No, we don't have anything yet.
Okay, great. So you know, one thing that stood out to me was so a lot of the shows, particularly in the beginning, that were mentioned in the beginning of the film, and I'll say the beginning, I mean like the first 45 minutes, where the fandom and fan fiction was into play, and people were talking about the shipping, and they were talking about how these characters made them feel, and it was presented and said about how seeing these characters and how they were living their lives, and then finally they came out that these characters were either bi or were queer. Mm-hmm. The audience felt as if they saw themselves on the screen. Mm-hmm. But something that I did recognize was that most of those characters or those actors in real life were not queer. Mm-hmm. So was that ever addressed? How was that addressed? Should there be more, in your opinion, as a person who's actually professionally in the industry and also part of the community, it should be more of an effort of actually hiring queer people to play a queer character?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it can only bring not only more authenticity, but a sense of lived experience. Is something that you can't, replace. I've been in the interesting position that a lot of actors who, because they had such great chemistry, a lot of the actors we hired on Carmilla came out as queer during the show. And actually one of my favorite examples of life imitates art and not art imitates life is that Caitlin Alexander, who plays La Fontaine, which is one of the few non-binary kind of lead characters back in 2014 on Carmilla. They came out as non-binary after their character did. So it was kind of like going through this fictional experience that led them to reevaluate their own identity. And I love that because I think we've seen a lot of those cases recently. What I'm excited about is that now it's not as touchy to kind of ask from the inside, hey, I really want to prioritize queer actors of color for these roles. This is what we're going to look at. There are enough people out there. They have an audience. We can go reach out to them. And I think I have another show that actually just came out today that is mostly played by queer actors of color, which is really nice because it's what we set out to do and that's who we found. So that was quite fun. So yes, I definitely think it's almost like we don't have to push as much from the inside now. You'll definitely hear but we need a star. So I don't know if we should only look at gay. And it's like, don't worry about this. Trust us. We'll find great people with the great chemistry will most likely be part of the community, or maybe they will become it by, virtue of doing the show.
Chanel, we do have
I
one.
do like how it was.
Yeah, we used to call it
Go ahead.
Domino effect. We're like, oh, another one. Hey!
We do have another question dovetailing on that with what you were just saying about having the actors being queer people of color. Can you talk a little bit about behind the camera as well? How important it is to have queer voices and people of color as writers and directors and producers?
Absolutely. I think who said it best was Gloria Calderon-Kellett on One Day at a Time. Culture affects policy, which affects change. And diversity doesn't mean much if it's also not behind the camera, because it has to come from a place of authenticity, it has to come from a place of lived experience, and it has to come from a place where you're not the only one. So we've all heard this. But what I love about both Vida and One Day at a Time being on the air at the same time, even though Vida just ended, which you should all watch if you haven't, is that these two queer Latinx shows could be on at the same time, and it's not one or the other. And I love that, So I think that's only possible when it's people from the community are telling their own stories, and that there doesn't have to be one. There can be these two very different shows that both touch upon queer Latinx issues and experiences.
Well, I like the idea. I like the fact that it was brought up and to our attention around also how now, because you're streaming services, that you're not fighting for time slots and you're trying to appease sponsors and advertisers anymore, because that's just not there anymore. So you can now make the content that you want with the actors that you want in it, and the audience will come. And we've seen that. There's a lot of TV shows. Every streaming network now has a lot of films and television shows that actually are really where a queer person is the main or the lead character. Yeah. And I know that I intentionally, on streaming services like Hulu or on Tubi, actually only use those to watch queer movies, because
and then
that's where you can find a really good niche movie, or a good movie that you would not have seen in mainstream media ever.
Absolutely.
But I did want to bring up something, because we keep saying this and again, and then watching the film and seeing the diversity in the age, especially like when we're talking about that, I forgot the name of the camp, but the Xena camp.
Yeah.
And seeing how the diversity in the ages of the women that were going to the camp, and recognizing that during that time when Xena first came out, queer was not really a positive word to be used. Mm-hmm. And so throughout this film, and then even with the conference, as we're talking now, and where the identity and queer is being accepted, was there any pushback around that when you're interviewing people, or with people that was involved, or even thinking about like maybe we should use different terminologies to be more inclusive for somebody that's over the age of 35?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think it did not cross our mind, unfortunately, while we were shooting, or it didn't come up in interviewers. It came up actually after the fact, when the movie was out and people were watching it in Canada, but also mostly from much younger generations, like 14, 15-year-olds were thinking more about the word, and they're like, should we use this? Because it used to be a slur. And I think we all have a different idea of what reclaiming means and what people are comfortable with. It also depends where they're coming from. It's also very it's an American view of this as well. And that is a really fascinating conversation, one that I'm not even sure I have the right answer for, because I do love the, transgressive reclaiming of it. And I do feel like it can be more inclusive of multiple identities than, specifically lesbian or LGBT.
Okay. Do you want to tell us about your upcoming show that you just said you're about to work on? Give us a little tease.
what's interesting, because we're talking about brands, and it's like, okay, so this show that's coming out today, I just consulted on it and worked with the writers, but it's created by this Black queer playwright from Toronto. It was one of my favorites, called Audrey Dwyer. And we somehow convinced Dove to help finance this like queer little ditty about a kind of masculine of center hair salon stylist in Montreal who was giving queer haircuts for everyone. And she kind of never charged more than $15 because she wanted to keep it accessible. But that also means they're kind of fighting gentrification and the salon is closing. And like, what does it mean to community if we don't have the space? And it kind of also explores the tensions between older generations of LGBT people, especially some that are like tired, you know, of activism. They're like, I just want to rest now. And the younger generation that really wants the space and cares for it. And we got to name one of the characters after my mom. So I'm very excited about that. And it'll be in the US in the next month on the same channel that Carmilla is, which is Kind of TV on YouTube. But if you're in Canada, you can watch it on Crave, which is one of our streaming services, which is very cool, as of tomorrow.
So that I couldn't order that as in the United States, Crave. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's in Canada only for this month. And then next month it'll be in the US on YouTube and worldwide.
Okay, before we go, I also wanted to bring up more about, because I thought that this was fascinating, and for a person, again, this is really opening the eyes around some of the vocabulary that was there, that was shown. I'm glad you like broke it down for some of the vocabulary for us that didn't know. So I want to discuss a little bit about Bury Your Gaze, the quote that happened. And then it was also brought up to where it was mentioned about the outcry around Bury Your Gaze. However, in films prior to that, it was, well, always just kill off the Black person, the minority person. Yes. And then when it was killing off the queer person, then it was, we got to save this person. So do you feel that that has changed now overall, that filmmakers are more conscious about being more sensitive about killing off minority characters in film and in television? Or do you just think that it's going to become a cycle? As someone that works in it, that knows, you know, if it's not a queer person working on the script, they're still going to use that.
Mm-hmm. Thankfully, I feel like it has changed, and that's just going by the numbers. Mm-hmm. It hasn't completely disappeared. I think what it does give is people who are in rooms, even if they're not the ones deciding, now have documentaries like Disclosure on Netflix or ours, or a lot of the articles that came out after Bury Your Gaze, because a lot of it was discussed before it hit those outlets, but it's almost as if it needed the validation of being in Variety or BBC for people to take it seriously, right. Say like, oh, these are just like internet freaks going on about characters, right? And I think having that mainstream recognition and discussion just made people aware that your show doesn't exist in a vacuum, because that's one of the things that comes up, right? A showrunner will say, well, my show, it's different, and we can do this death because we've earned it, and because we've been so nice in the past, or we've kind of done this much. And I think what this doc and other kind of conversations want creators to realize is that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. As much as you would like it to be, you are unable to divorce it from context, regardless of the world your show takes place in. So yes, I feel like that's changed. Some things that haven't changed is that fandom, unfortunately, like remains a fundamentally kind of white space, and it shouldn't be. And I think there's definitely more groups and discussion about how do we make it more inclusive in general. And hopefully we'll just see that change for the better in the years to come.
What about queer baiting? Do you think that's changed? Because that's something that I recognize, not even in just film, but also in like advertisements.
Oh yeah, definitely in advertisements, for sure.
Especially in June.
Oh my God, yeah, for sure. You see it all the time. I think we'll still see that. There's definitely, I mean, I still see it. I still have to kind of undersell the gay when I'm pitching a show that's fundamentally even about queer people. I have to undersell the gay aspect and really hit the universal card. Like, look how like everyone else they are, even though that's not where you want to go with the show. It's like, that's what you have to sell. And then you kind of just bring it back in. Right. Despite, you know, the lip service and the discussions everyone have, there's still a fear that it's only going to attract the queer community. Well, that's not true. So it's almost as if we have to overcompensate pitching the universal angle. And then kind of once we're in, we're like, yes, we made it. Now let's try more. So hopefully these things are changing for sure, slowly but surely. And it comes back to, like you said, the less reliance on specific type of advertising, more reliance on directly going out to and courting certain communities. And knowing that, our eyeballs have value, and so does the fandom activity.
Is there some kind of like insider secret around making any queer films or television that they need to be blessed by a certain organization? So say, for instance, if GLAAD doesn't like it, is it dead? I'm using GLAAD as an example.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I don't think so. There's definitely, there's some films that GLAAD has loved that have cited so much controversy, like Adam last year. And I think we're also a bit wary of shows that feel too homonormative. And it's like, okay, this feels like it's not for us. It's so normalized and so bland in a way, which is good too. I think there is room for that. But I hope there are, more transgressive queer voices, or to continue just putting their unabashedly gay, queer, and messy stuff out there that doesn't have to conform to homonormative ideals. Does that make sense?
And what about finally being a woman and working in the industry? We only see and hear publicly about a handful of women. Mm-hmm. So what is your actual account or perception of being in the industry about representation of women behind the scenes, that are the writers, that are the directors, that actually are executive producers, that actually get to call the shots around this kind of these scripts that are sometimes, a lot of times, where women are leads, because we see even in heteronormative films or television where has to be this thin, young, beautiful woman married to this older guy, and that's okay. Was there not a woman there that got to weigh in on that?
The stats are still pretty dismal. Some are getting better, some are not. I think the conversation makes it seem sometimes like it's gaining a lot of steam, but that's also because we celebrate those things, we uplift those stories. We don't always report the fact that, a huge percentage of showrunners are still straight white men, even on shows that are not about them. So, and it's great that we need to hold up every other individual success, that's especially from within our community, but we mustn't lose track of the bigger picture and looking at numbers. That's why I'm a big fan of quotas. It's like when John Landgraf of FX was told and called out, these are how few female directors you have. And then it was that call out that led to him wanting to meet like 50% will be women, X% will be women of color. And you're like, right, that's it. And now we have no choice but to meet this. And the same thing in Canada, CBC, our national broadcaster, has committed to a 50% mandate, I think either by 2021 or 2022. And that's really the only way to do it, I think. It has to come, there has to be like a decisive number and goal, and then we have to keep them accountable. And that's our job as fandom people as well, is to keep tabs on it, be critical of the media we love, and keep pushing it and keep encouraging more voices to come in, so that we're not the tokens of various intersectionalities. We want to have like multiple Black queer shows, we want to have multiple Latinx ones. I'm working on 2 queer Jewish shows where there's Middle Eastern Jews that are also queer like me, and also more kind of European Polish ones. And you want to explore all of those things without feeling that you're the only one doing it.
Thank you, Steph. So in our last 4 minutes, tell us, how can we even see Courting the Script here in America?
Well, as you were saying before, it's right now only out on Canadian broadcasters. However, we're still looking for a US home for the film. So if any of you are gays in high places, you know who to contact. We'd love to place it somewhere here still. In the meantime, you can also just DM me on Twitter. My handle is StephenTV, Teevee, and I will happily send you a link because I want more people to watch this film, especially the ones that are, you know, in fandom and want to celebrate our community.
Hey, Chanel, before we leave, we did have another question that came up that I think is important to address again before we leave. But we were wondering, Steph, how you reacted when you were making this film, or as you're kind of going through this, when so many lesbians were killed off in these series in 2016.
You mean how I reacted in 2016 or as we were making it?
As you were making it, as this was all coming together and you're seeing all of this, putting the stories together, how did you react to that?
And again, it comes down to numbers. There were so many, and it was sometimes multiple in the same week. It's almost, and it's just the sheer volume and the percentage of deaths relating to the percentages of characters was just so abnormal. And I remember actually in 2016, I remember the night Lexa died and how it did take over all of our fanish circles, even different shows were all talking about the same thing. And it kind of reached a boiling point of what is the best way to kind of address this and also convince people that this does matter to us. It's not just a TV show. It reflects upon bigger issues that we have. So I'd say I remember that night, and it's still it's still touching when I watch all those, especially all the YouTube vlogs back to back, because that's like Jose, one of the writers, the writer of the Lex episode says, he's like, I didn't think I'd be able to watch them be traumatized, but thanks to YouTube, you can be, and you did see it. And people were very vulnerable sharing that as well, because there was also at the time significant pushback, you know, why do you care so much? She was just a side character. She got another job. Doesn't matter. It's not about you gays. So I remember those discussions, and I'm glad that the numbers have changed for sure. I think people are more aware, and aware not only of optics, but also of what's the most interesting thing to do. And chances are it's really not that. So, you know, question context, the history. I didn't know about the Hays Code. So while making this film, I mean, I knew something like it existed, but it was very interesting to see like, oh, this is literally the text. This is literally what it says, you know? And that just explains so much. I mean, we can't divorce ourselves and our current stories from culture.
And then one more, are you planning to make any more documentaries?
I'd love to. I love doc. It was so fun. It was really so fun. I'd love to make more queer docs. So we'll see. Hopefully we will. But nothing on the docket.
Maybe we have follow-up in 10 years.
Yeah.
And the numbers will be much different.
I'm sure they will. And also the, you know, interactivity with the audience is changing all the time. So it'll be I'm really curious to see where it goes. As someone who's worked in short form web series for a long time, where we're so dependent and kind of fused with our fandoms. We'll see where that goes.
We are at 9 o'clock.
Oh, I can hear you now. There we go. Sorry, I wasn't sure. Sometimes it was freezing on my end, but I just kept talking. I was like, hope it works.
No, you came through really, really well. So thank you. And thank you, Chanel. We've made it right on time. I want to just thank everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you for joining us for, I think this film in particular, which I actually did see it when it premiered at Inside Out in Toronto, and just loved it. And really, I think it's an important story to tell. These are important stories to tell about what happens and how people do react, and how important it is to tell our stories. So we certainly do hope that you're able to tell more of our stories, either in narrative form or in documentary form. So I want to thank everybody for joining us, and thank you, Steph, and thank you, Chanel, for doing this with us this evening. And thank you all for joining us for this series. This has been a lot of fun for us to do with Georgia Equality as we celebrate Pride this month, and trying to bring you stories that you may not have heard or been familiar with, or maybe there is just a story that's about you and spoke to you, and that's what we're here to do at Out on Film, is to represent the entire community all of our voices and all of our stories. And so I hope that you'll join us on this virtual journey as we get to the rest of the summer and the fall. And thank you again, everybody, for joining us this evening, and have a good one.
Thank you.